Welcome to the first lecture in the Mid-Tudor series. In this lecture, we will examine why the Duke of Somerset only governed England on behalf of his nephew Edward VI for 2 years. This lecture will be split into 4 parts. We will first examine the composition of the Regency Council and Somerset's position as Lord Protector. We will then examine the first rebellion of 1549, the Western Rebellion, sometimes known as the Prayer Book Rebellion. Then we will examine the Second Rebellion of 1549, known as the Kent Rebellion. Finally, we examine the coup d'état against the Duke of Somerset, led by the Duke of Northumberland. Before we begin, let's first address a confusion about the names and titles of key characters. The Duke of Somerset started life as Edward Seymour, the son of a baron called Sir John Seymour. However, due to his sister Jane's short marriage to Henry, he was elevated quickly up the ranks of the peerage. He first became Viscount Beauchamp when Jane Seymour marries Henry in 1536, and then he becomes the Earl of Hertford in 1539, following Jane's delivery of a healthy male heir for the king. Therefore, when we talk about him in the context of the late Henrician period, he is the Earl of Hertford. However, when he wins the power struggle to become Lord Protector to Edward, he elevates himself to the title of the Duke of Somerset. Similarly, Somerset's nemesis, the Duke of Northumberland, also goes by many titles. He is the son of Edmund Dudley, who was executed at the start of Henry's reign for his treasonous activities in the Council Learned. He then grew up as a ward of another household, before gaining the title of Viscount Lisle for serving Henry as Vice Admiral in the late 1530s. When he becomes a named executor of Edward's Regency Council in 1547, he is also given the title of the Earl of Warwick. This is then his title until he performs a successful coup d'état against Somerset in 1549, when he makes himself Lord President and the Duke of Northumberland. Let's first examine the context of Edward's succession in 1547. During the final years of Henry's reign, there was factional struggle between the Conservatives, led by the Duke of Norfolk, and the Reformists, led by the Duke of Somerset, although at this point he was the Earl of Hertford. The faction was divided down religious lines, causing confusion across the nation about the nature of the Reformation under Henry VIII. When Henry died in January 1547, the Reformist faction were dominant, and Norfolk was arrested and imprisoned for the whole of Edward's reign. However, this political confusion meant that there was a lot of work still to be done in order to make England a truly Protestant nation. The second most significant problem was Edward's age. He was only 9 years old, less than a century prior. His namesake Edward V had been deposed and then disappeared in the Tower of London. This would have made the court nervous about the implications of another boy king. It was necessary to create a protectorate, with a regency council of appointed ministers to govern on the king's behalf. As part of Henry's will, he specified that the Duke of Somerset, as Edward's maternal uncle, should act as Lord Protector. However, this was only signed with the dry stamp, meaning it could be more easily contested. The third problem was that Henry died while England was still at war with France and Scotland. This war had thus far cost £2 million, and Henry's short-sighted policy of debasement of the coinage had resulted in soaring inflation. At Edward's ascension, no reconciliation with the French was in sight. Somerset was a military man, He wanted the opportunity to achieve further victories on the battlefield that would boost his own personal glory. Therefore, he decided to continue the war. Edward's Regency Council was made up of 16 executors, and the Duke of Somerset as the Lord Protector. The executors would act as ministers, who would make decisions on behalf of the king. This was controversial since no member of the Regency Council contained royal blood, and so did not have the birthright to rule. Alongside Somerset, Thomas Cranmer continued his role as Archbishop of Canterbury, and he would be responsible for the doctrinal changes of the Edwardian Reformation, which we will examine in a separate lecture. Other notable figures include William Paget, who was a competent administrator, Somerset's brother Thomas Seymour, who was given the role of Lord Admiral of the Royal Fleet, who I will discuss in more detail shortly, the Duke of Suffolk Henry Grey, whose wife Frances had been hastily added to the line of succession in 1544, and the brutally ambitious John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick, who would perform the coup against Somerset. The Duke of Somerset decided to bypass the Regency Council when making important decisions, and instead decided to rule by decree rather than parliamentary legislation. For example, he approached the Scots with an offer to unify as part of the rough wing policy, something that really should have been debated by both council and parliament. He also made bad decisions, including the continuation of the debasement of the coinage. This meant other leading members of the council, such as Suffolk and Warwick, felt even more sidelined from politics. Added to this, everyone at court believed as fact that Richard III had murdered his two nephews to make himself king, so the association of the wicked power-thirsty uncle would not have done Somerset's reputation any good. Throughout his regency, the Duke of Somerset's position was undermined by the actions of his younger brother Thomas Seymour. His first action was to marry the king's stepmother Catherine Parr, without royal permission, probably since he knew his brother would oppose the match. Then, while his wife was pregnant, he began a rather unsavory pursuit of Elizabeth, who was a 13-year-old ward of his household. After Catherine Parr died in childbirth in September 1548, he continued his pursuit of Elizabeth, resulting in rumors that he had molested and perhaps even raped her, and that he was looking to marry her in a bid to gain power. In January 1549, Somerset tried to call his brother to a council meeting to answer these accusations. Instead, Thomas Seymour attempted a coup d'état against his brother by breaking into the king's chamber in the middle of the night, killing the king's poor pet spaniel, and trying to take possession of him. He was caught by guards and sent to the Tower on charges of treason. After this, his associates were under suspicion, including the 15-year-old Elizabeth, who had to deny any sexual relationship with him in an interrogation that lasted for weeks. Elizabeth was finally absolved of any wrongdoing, and Seymour was executed in March 1549. This family drama only served to highlight Somerset's weak control of the court. If he could not even keep his brother under control, what hope did he have against those who conspired to take his position at the head of the council? Let's now examine the two rebellions that Somerset faced during his brief 2 years as Lord Protector. Historian Susan Doran calls the year of 1549 the year of commotions, because there was widespread social discontent across the country. This was down to two key reasons. Firstly, the continuation of the policy of debasement of the coinage meant that food prices rose, and this caused strain on the commoners. This was aggravated by the long-term trend away from agrarian farming and toward pastoral farming, whereby landlords would enclose land to farm sheep or other livestock in a practice called enclosure. Furthermore, the sudden religious changes caused by the top-down nature of the English Reformation caused discontent, especially in rural, conservative communities. The first rebellion to break out was in the southwest of England, including the counties of Cornwall and Devon, which was a very remote region of England. It has sometimes been dubbed the Prayer Book Rebellion, since one of the primary causes of the rebellion was objection to the introduction of Cranmer's first Common Book of Prayer. However, to say it was just down to this would be too simplistic. The community had other religious grievances, such as an objection to the closure of chantries, which acted like mini monasteries in towns. There were also demands to return to a more conservative form of religious practice, including the doctrine of transubstantiation, which is when the bread and wine are spiritually transformed into the body and blood of Christ. The rebels marched under the banner of the 5 wounds of Christ, the same symbol as the Pilgrims of Grace in 1536, which would certainly suggest that religion was the main motivation for the rebellion. However, there was also underlying economic causes of the Western Rebellion due to the economy being in decline. One of these was a grievance toward the 1548 introduction of sheep tax. There was a rumor that this tax would be extended to geese and pigs, which would have much wider implications for the common folk, since most were not affluent enough to own a herd of sheep, but they did use common land to farm geese and swine. They also expressed grievances toward the rise in food prices and inflation. The Western Rebellion began in April 1548, a full year before it came to a head. The conflict began with the murder of a local commissioner called William Body by angry locals. This is because Body had gained a notorious reputation for raiding local churches, destroying precious artifacts, and then selling off the loot for his own profit. A local mob learnt of his movements in the town of St. Keverne and attacked and murdered him. Somerset was slow to react to the rebellion, as he was distracted by the French campaign. Therefore the mob were allowed to get away with the murder, and therefore they gathered further momentum, snowballing this from a local, isolated incident to a region-wide rebellion. It then became more organized when it received local noble support from Lord Arundel. It wasn't until the summer of 1549 that Somerset sent a military command, by which time the rebel horde numbered 6,000 strong. They try to besiege the city of Exeter in Devon, but the townsfolk do not support the cause. They are then met with a military force of 8,000 soldiers, under the command of Lord Russell. It takes until August 1549 for Lord Russell to fully put down the rebellion, as he does not receive cooperation from the local gentry, which suggests that by this point there was a breakdown in communication and trust between local and central government. Somerset may have recovered from this rebellion, had it not been for the fact that by August 1549, he was having to divert his attention to East Anglia for another more significant challenge in the Ket Rebellion. The Ket Rebellion is an important rebellion to remember, because it is the only rebellion from the mid-Tudor era that was solely motivated by economic and political causes. East Anglia was a region where the new Protestant faith had been relatively well accepted, and so religion does not play a part. The main grievance of the rebels was with the practice of enclosure, especially since many local landlords had been illegally enclosing common land to farm their sheep. This had resulted in peasant hardship, since this land had historically been used for the common grazing of animals, so that the dairy and meat produce could be used to supplement the diets of the peasants. As part of the rebellion, local peasants tore down the hedges and fences of the enclosed land, emphatic proof that this was at the center of their grievance. There were other economic grievances expressed by the rebels. This includes rent racking, the increase of rents on tenant land to an unaffordable level, and there were also concerns that the landlords were overstocking the common land with farm animals, which depleted the land quality for the peasants. There were some more petty grievances, such as complaints that landlords had been letting rabbits run amok across crop fields, which show the level of tension. Marxist historians have even gone so far as to say this was a class war, with the commoners rising up against the greed and corruption of the ruling class, the landlords. This was all exacerbated by the ongoing problem of inflation and food price rises. There were also some political causes to the Kett Rebellion, linked to the weaknesses of both central and local government. Geoffrey Elton argues that the local justices of the peace were slow to react to the grievances of the rebels. Furthermore, Somerset had been conducting a commission into the practice of enclosure similar to the one conducted by Wolsey in the 1510s, and so was appearing like a friend to the poor who would support them in their grievances. This empowered them to take bolder actions against their local lords. The rebellion is named after the ringleader, Robert Kett. He was a wealthy farmer, who originally had been the subject of the rebels' wrath. However, he had listened to the grievances of his tenants and sympathized, deciding to ultimately join their cause and help them to tear down the hedgerows. He also had a local rivalry with another landlord called Flowerdew, and this personal feud added greater fuel to the flame of the rebellion. On Tuesday, the 9th of July, the rebels marched to the largest town in East Anglia, Norwich. The rebels laid siege to the town before setting up camp in nearby Mousehold. Kett then organized a meeting at a local oak tree, which was dubbed the Oak of Reformation. There the rebels met to put together a petition of grievances, and to also host a quasi-trial of the corrupt landlords. Marxist historians have seen this as further proof of revolutionary action in a class war. Later, when the rebellion was put down, 9 ringleaders, including Kett, were hanged from the oak tree as a symbol of their defeat. By July 1549, the rebel horde had grown to 16,000 strong. They stormed Norwich and took control of this important city. Since Somerset had run out of other options, he sent Italian mercenaries under the command of the Marquis of Northampton to put down the rebellion, turning him from hero to villain overnight. This resulted in street fighting in Norwich and the defeat of the mercenaries. Somerset then made a fatefully bad decision for his own political career. He sent the Earl of Warwick and a force of 12,000 English soldiers to East Anglia to crush the rebellion. This, Warwick did with brutal efficiency. The subsequent battle resulted in roughly 3,000 rebel deaths. He showed no mercy to the rebels, hanging 5,000 in total, including Kett. He then turned his army of 12,000 men in the direction of London in order to perform his coup d'état against Somerset. Let's now examine Somerset's downfall. By autumn 1549, it was painstakingly clear that Somerset had lost control of both the nation and the royal court. By the start of October, he became aware that his position as Lord Protector was under threat, and so he made a foolishly bold move. He made a public proclamation for support, and then took possession of the king's person, before fleeing to Windsor Castle, which was well fortified to defend his position. In Edward's diary, he wrote, "Methinks I am in prison." Meanwhile, the Regency Council gathered evidence of Somerset's poor leadership and brought a case of incompetence against him. As part of this, they stated that Somerset's power as Lord Protector came from them as the executors, and not from the king's will. By the 11th of October, they were able to arrest Somerset and move Edward to Richmond Palace. In his diary, he denounced his uncle's behavior, describing, quote, his ambition and vainglory, entering into rash wars in mine, enriching himself of my treasure, following his own opinion, and doing all by his own authority. At this point, Somerset was stripped of office and imprisoned in the Tower. However, his close relationship with the king saved him from the executioner's axe for now. Despite the clear evidence of treason, Somerset was restored to a position on the Regency Council in 1550, under Northumberland as Lord President. A year later, he was arrested under charges of treason. Allegedly, he had attempted a counter-coup against Northumberland's regime, who by this point had developed a close relationship and mentorship of the young king. Historians debate the extent to which Somerset did attempt to regain control of the council as part of this counter-coup, and the degree to which Northumberland falsified the charges in order to secure his own position. Nonetheless, in January 1552, Somerset was executed on charges of felony. In his diary, the boy king impassively noted the execution of his beloved uncle with the following comment: "The Duke of Somerset had his head cut off upon Tower Hill between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning." Let's return to the overarching question of why did the Duke of Somerset only govern for 2 years? Firstly, the way in which he chose to govern meant that he made enemies. He was a weak autocrat who preferred to rule by decree than to consult Parliament or the Council in important matters. Furthermore, he made poor decisions, such as the continuation of the debasement of the coinage. Secondly, he faced significant challenges in the year 1549, dubbed the Year of Commotions. This began with the Western Rebellion, which was motivated by both economic and religious grievances. Then Somerset faced a larger rebellion in East Anglia called the Kent Rebellion, which was purely motivated by socio-economic grievances. Finally, Somerset faced a coup d'état led by the Earl of Warwick, who would become the Duke of Somerset, and supported by the Regency Council. Whilst he escaped the executioner's axe in the autumn of 1549, 2 years later Northumberland was able to engineer sufficient charges against him for his execution. Thank you for listening. Please tune into the next lecture to learn about the religious changes made as part of the Edwardian Reformation.